tell you, sports are a big business.
Mm-hmm.
Americans, everybody internationally, they love their sports. And so I don't know how you stop a lot of this madness as you saw the other night, short of, again, I really believe, and I'm one who believes in mentoring, but it's got to be, sometimes that mentoring must be intense. I think you have to have these guys who are seniors in college or playing for the NFL or the NBA. They need to come to these schools and they need to tell these people, your chances of making it to the NBA, you got a better chance of hitting the lottery. They need to have these down-to-earth discussions with these children, because at least it will make them open their eyes and open their brain. This tunnel vision of I'm either going to the NBA or I'm going to work at McDonald's, there is something very wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
But you and I cannot tell these children that,
right,
because we're not pro ball players. We don't know what we're talking about. So they will listen just like any other child. They will listen to somebody who knows. They will listen to somebody who's been there. That's what we have to start looking at. How do we get those that have made it to reach back and talk to those who are trying to make it? I don't think, and I'm not very well versed in what I know that they do things like start different schools and blah, and I think that's fine. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done right in these high schools before these children ever get to college.
Right.
And I think that's work that can be easy for them. I don't know, how many Redskins do we have? 25, 35? If they all went out 2 days a week or 1 day a week, they can hit every high school in the county and just give that lecture.
Mm-hmm.
Let me tell you about football. Let me tell you the ins and outs. It's more than just the Sunday hoopla. There's a lot more to it. Everybody doesn't make $10 million a year. Some guys hit that field and they make no more than they would have made if they would have managed a clothing shop. So I believe that this is a good conversation that must be had, but you've got to get this conversation to the right people.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to get them to chime in. I think it's a great conversation. You know, we'll talk about role models so children don't get locked up, role models so children blah, blah. But we need to have people, role models who played the game, if you will.
Right.
To come back and talk to those who have an interest in the game. They may change their mind.
Right.
We know there are a whole lot of those that get their knees blown out, whose every dream they ever had comes to an end, but that should not have been their only dream.
Right. Right. And then you got other, sometimes the parents will get blindsided too, or got into this tunnel vision of it's got to be this and nothing else. My oldest daughter was playing tennis and gotten to be pretty good, and people were bringing to our attention, you might.
Yeah, I think we lost Thinbad briefly, but I think he was making the point of his daughter was an aspiring tennis player, and people were bringing things to his attention, and I'm assuming he was just kind of going to kind of emphasize that, you still have to keep them focused on the educational process as well. But Phil, one of the things that I wanted to ask you is, so when you have that young person that comes in, particularly that athlete, and you have found that the energy is not there to make that transition, what do you do as the leader of that mentoring program and to sort of guide them down the right path? And I think Thinbad is back with us now, and I'm going to let him finish his question after you answer that one.
I don't even know what Who
You're
was?
good.
I didn't even have a question. Go ahead. I was just talking.
9 daughters. I think, Mike, as I mentioned before, Chief.
Yes, sir.
You have to find a way to replace one dream with another.
Sure.
What we try to do is find out what's in this child's mind that's not being explored. See, too often, most often, sports are what's put on the forefront of their minds by us.
Sure.
What we have to do is we have to listen to the child. We have to look at how he talks with others that may come in. For example, we had one young boy we had an architect who came in. And the architect showed the buildings he had designed, but he really went into it in depth. He talked about the steel workers and how the concrete was poured and how the concrete had to have exactly the right mix and how this steel beam had to fit there with this kind of fitting. The young man's interest became so intense that he asked if the architect could mentor him. Now, we were pleasantly surprised, but what we realized was nobody tried to get inside of his head to find out what else was there.
Sure.
What else is in there? Do you know how many children who play football who are great artists? We've had that happen.
Sure.
So you replace one dream with another, or you replace a dream with a reality, or you have to get the young person to understand you are young. You really don't know all of the things that you may want to do in life. But if you only focus on this one thing, if it falls apart, you have nothing. And then we will show them what nothing can look like. And one example that I do use Dexter Manley.
Sure.
I do use that example.
Sure. Well, in that light, Phil, and you know, there's certainly a degree of responsibility that every individual has to have. And I know you preach that. I've heard you preach that to the young people. And my other concern is, what do you do, Phil, when you're doing your process of mentoring and getting that background stuff, and you're finding that mom and dad are the problem? It's not the coach per se. The coach is on board. The young person is at least they're giving you the impression that, okay, Mr. Lee, I understand that some of this is on me. I have to do what I have to do. But what do you do, Phil, when you have the parent that's like, look, Mr. Lee, I've been getting this boy ready for Pop Warner and the Super Bowl and the Pro Bowl in Canton for the last 15 years. And that's where we are. What do you do when you run up against that brick wall, Phil?
So, and that is a challenge, and it does happen, because parents basically are saying to me, I don't have the right to defer their dream. And I have to always find a way, sometimes search hard, to have a parental respect for that parent, because it is their child. So what you have to try to do, what we have tried to do, is we try to get the parent to look at examples of what may happen.
Okay, like what, for example?
Well, as again, I use Dexter Manley, and I use Dexter Manley's situation religiously, because you sometimes have to say to the parent, can you imagine how Dexter Manley's parents felt when they saw the way he went into a downward spiral, and all of the hoping and dreaming they want could not bring him out of it? They could not bring him out of it. And then you have to try to get them to understand. It's kind of like, and I tell you, Chief, I use this part also. You don't push your child to become a police officer if that's not what they want to do. You don't push a child to become a police officer
Sure.
because you were a police officer. Because if you do, and something goes wrong, you will blame yourself forever. Now, with these fathers, more so the fathers than the mothers, the fathers, you will see a light go off. They'll stop and they'll think. The mothers are the bigger problem. And I tell you a sadness. Too many of these mothers want their son to be more than their father. And so I don't want to hear what you got to say. I know my son can do this. I know he's capable of doing this. And this is that selfish part that Thinbad was talking about. And so how do you get through? And I got to tell you this. It is difficult for a male to get through to a female, a mother, and try to tell them what is good or maybe not so good for their child because they think they know best. Mm-hmm. Their son is their star. But what we have to do, we keep putting examples before them in a very subtle way. You can't approach these people with a full forward march. You understand? You have to kind of sneak things up on them. You have to give them things to think about. I meet with parents every 3 months. And I know some of the subjects that I have to cover subtly, if you will. We'll bring sports players in who were superstars in high school, who ended up doing 15 years in prison.
Sure.
But that gives the mothers some things to think about. So it becomes a psychological approach, if you will, because you can't just tell them, don't do this.
Sure.
It's their child.
Exactly.
But a lot of work does, in fact, have to go into the parent.
Yeah, and Phil, it's ironic that you mentioned that because, of course, one of the other tragic stories that we've been hearing about lately is Delonte West, who came out of Roosevelt and eventually ended up playing with LeBron and the Nuggets and the troubles that he's had lately. And I know LeBron recently said that he was going to do all he could to help this young man. But when you look back at his past, and you look at some of the issues that he was dealing with and some of the signs that he was displaying, it gets right back to your point of, who is paying attention to this young man. Now, certainly, he at least what they're reporting is that that he had some issues with mental health and those types of things. But again, Phil, when you look at that, when you look at a young man who was a star basketball player in high school, a star basketball player in college, and now you're saying that he had mental health challenges, my point is that someone had to be taking him to the game. Somebody had to be high-fiving him. Someone had to be coaching him. Someone had to be teaching him algebra and those types of things. You mean to tell me that no one seem to recognize that there's some challenges for this young man here? And my point is, Phil, that's the kind of stuff that leads to what we saw in Kansas the other night. Now they're reporting that now they're up to 4 students that are going to be suspended as a result of this. But, I just wonder, in your program, are you emphasizing to all involved, you have to pay attention to the small things as well as can he possibly make it to the NBA or the NFL or the National Hockey League or the WNBA and those types of things?
Well, it's you bring that concern up. So let me tell you what we find a lot of. There are young people who have what are called IEPs. Educational plan because they don't do well for various reasons academically. We find that a lot of those students end up playing ball. Now, I had one case where it did not make sense to me. One, I knew that the boy needed to have at least a 2.5 GPA to play. So what they did was they put him in one of our special schools where you could almost get a 2.5 if your name was on the roll.
Sure.
But then they had him playing ball at another school.
Okay.
Now, here's what I found out, which was crushing. And I will say it's only been one of these cases, but I think it's going to lead to your point. He did not know not to run down that field and crash